Hello, everyone, and welcome to Seven Continents, One Story.
Hi there. So glad you're joining us today.
Hey everyone, great to have you here.
I'm Niels, professor of history from Sweden.
I'm Celine, joining you from Edinburgh, Scotland.
And I'm Ethan, calling in from Malta.
Together, we explore incredible stories from history across all 7 continents.
Every episode brings you a new journey through time.
From ancient civilizations to modern moments that changed everything.
So let's begin. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to 7 Continents, One Story.
Hey, so good to be here again. How are you both doing?
I'm doing great. I've been reading about today's topic all week and I'm so pumped.
That's wonderful to hear, Ethan. Your enthusiasm is contagious.
I have to say, I've been diving into the library archives for this one too. Found some fascinating materials.
Can we get started? I can't wait.
Absolutely. Today, we're going somewhere most people have never heard of, but it changed the entire world. Are you ready?
Oh, I love episodes like this. The hidden moments that shaped everything.
Then let me show you something extraordinary. Right. Celine, I have something here that's going to stump you completely.
Oh no, is this another one of your mystery artifacts?
Indeed, it is. And this time, I'm absolutely certain you won't guess what it is.
Wait, can I try to guess too?
Of course, Ethan. In fact, I think you might have an advantage on this one.
An advantage? Now I'm really curious. What is it?
All right, here's your first clue. This object is made from plant fibers. It's thin, almost delicate. You can write on it, and in the year 751 CE, it was one of the most closely guarded secrets in the entire world.
Plant fibers you can write on, and it's a secret.
751 CE? That's right in the middle of the medieval period. But I'm thinking about what they wrote on. Parchment was animal skin, not plants.
Good thinking, Celine. Not parchment.
Wait, is it paper? But that's from China, right?
Ethan, you're on the right track. But the mystery goes much deeper than you think.
Deeper how? Paper is paper, isn't it?
What if I told you that this particular piece of paper was created by someone who had been captured in battle? Someone who was forced to reveal one of the greatest technological secrets of all time.
That's so cool. Who captured them?
We'll get to that, but first, let me take you there. The year is 751 CE. It's July, the height of summer. You're standing on the banks of the Talas River, somewhere in what we now call Central Asia, modern-day Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. The sun is absolutely beating down. It's hot, dusty, dry, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer. You can smell thousands of horses. You can smell sweat, leather, metal. You can hear the sounds of 2 massive armies preparing for battle. To your east, the Tang Dynasty forces. These are Chinese soldiers, 20,000 of them, arranged in disciplined ranks. Their armor gleams in the sunlight, bronze and iron scales, carefully crafted. They carry crossbows, the most advanced ranged weapons in the world at that time. Their cavalry wear lamellar armor, small iron plates sewn onto leather backing, flexible but protective. To your west, the Abbasid army, the Islamic Caliphate. They're fresh from their revolution just 1 year earlier, in 750 CE. They've overthrown the Umayyads and they're expanding eastward. They've brought allies with them, the Karluk Turks from the steppes. Light cavalry, incredibly mobile, masters of mounted archery. And both sides know, absolutely know, that this battle will determine who controls Central Asia for the next several centuries. The Silk Road trade routes, the flow of goods, ideas, technology, religion, everything. This is the Battle of Talas.
That setup gives me chills.
Central Asia, the Silk Road. I've read about how important that was. Every caravan that passed through those cities paid taxes, traded goods.
Exactly. This wasn't just about territory. This was about controlling the very arteries of world trade. To understand how we got to this moment, we need to step back about 20 years. The Tang Dynasty of China was at its absolute peak of power in the early 700s CE.
How big was the Tang Dynasty?
Imagine an empire that stretched from the Pacific Ocean in the east all the way to the edges of Central Asia in the west, from the borders of Siberia in the north down to Vietnam in the south. At its height, the Tang Dynasty controlled more territory than the Roman Empire ever did.
That's enormous. How did they manage to control all of that?
Military power, sophisticated administration, and something called the tributary system. Smaller kingdoms and peoples on the borders would acknowledge Tang authority, pay tribute, and in return, they got protection and access to Chinese trade.
Kind of like how the United States has military bases around the world today.
That's actually a brilliant comparison, Ethan. Yes, very similar. The Tang Dynasty had military garrisons throughout Central Asia in cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, Tashkent.
And the other side, the Abbasids, I know that name from reading about Islamic history, but I always get the dynasties confused.
Don't worry, it is confusing. The Abbasid Caliphate had just come to power in 750 CE through a revolution. They overthrew the previous Umayyad dynasty. Fresh leadership, ambitious, and they were expanding in all directions.
So both empires were super powerful and they both wanted to control Central Asia?
Exactly. And the oasis cities of Central Asia, places like Samarkand and Bukhara, were incredibly wealthy. The Silk Road ran directly through them. Whoever controlled those cities controlled the trade between East and West.
It's a bit like Constantinople in later centuries. Controlling that one city meant controlling trade between Europe and Asia.
Perfect parallel, Celine. Yes, these Central Asian cities were just as crucial in their time. Now, the Tang forces were led by a general named Gao Xianzhi. He was actually of Korean descent, but had risen through the Tang military ranks. Brilliant commander, very ambitious. But among his officers was another general, Li Siye.
Li Siye? How do you pronounce that?
Li Siye. Li Siye commanded the Black Armoured Cavalry, elite heavy cavalry units. He was known for being absolutely fearless in combat.
Black Armoured Cavalry? That sounds impressive.
They were the shock troops of the Tang army, heavily armored horsemen who would charge directly into enemy formations. Think of medieval knights, but a few centuries earlier and in Central Asia.
Okay, so we've got two massive empires about to clash. What exactly were they fighting over?
Control of the Silk Road. But more than that, control of the future. Whoever won this battle would dominate Central Asia for centuries to come. That meant controlling the flow of silk, spices, precious metals, and most importantly, ideas and technology.
So it's not just about territory, it's about being the center of the world.
Exactly. And there was another dimension. The Tang Dynasty represented Chinese cultural influence spreading westward. The Abbasid Caliphate represented Islamic influence spreading eastward. This wasn't just a military conflict. It was a civilizational crossroads.
But Niels, why should we care about a battle from over 1,200 years ago? What does this have to do with us today?
Because, Ethan, the Battle of Talas didn't just decide who controlled Central Asia. It changed how the entire world recorded and shared knowledge. It enabled the Islamic Golden Age. It eventually helped spark the European Renaissance. Without this battle, without what happened to those Chinese prisoners, the world we live in today would be fundamentally different.
Wait, what happened to the prisoners? You've mentioned them twice now.
We'll get to that. But first, we need to understand the battle itself. By 751 CE, tensions between the Tang Dynasty and the Abbasid Caliphate had been rising for years. Both empires were expanding. Both were claiming tribute from the same Central Asian kingdoms. Something had to give.
So what was the trigger? What actually started the war?
The trigger was brutal and simple. The Tang general, Gao Xianzhi, attacked the city of Tashkent without provocation. The king of Tashkent had been paying tribute to the Tang dynasty, but Gao Xianzhi accused him of disloyalty. He sacked the city, killed the king, and took enormous amounts of plunder.
That seems excessive.
It was, and it backfired spectacularly. The king's son escaped and fled to the Abbasid court in Baghdad. He begged for help, for justice, for revenge. The Abbasid caliph saw an opportunity. This wasn't just about helping a wronged prince. This was about checking Tang expansion westward.
So the Abbasids marched east to confront the Tang forces?
Exactly. The Abbasid forces were led by Ziyad ibn Salih, an experienced commander. He gathered his forces and headed toward the Talas River, where the Tang army was waiting.
What did these armies look like? How were they different from each other?
The Tang forces were incredibly well equipped. Remember, the Tang dynasty had been dominant for over a century. Their soldiers wore advanced armor, they had sophisticated siege weapons, and their military organization was legendary. They had learned from centuries of Chinese military tradition, going back to the Han dynasty 400 years earlier.
And the Abbasids?
The Abbasid forces were different. They were newer, more flexible. They relied heavily on cavalry, especially their Turkic allies. They had siege weapons, trebuchets that could hurl stones 300 meters, but their real strength was mobility and adaptability. They could move fast, strike hard, and they weren't bound by rigid formations.
So it's like a clash of military philosophies, discipline versus flexibility?
Brilliant observation, Ethan. Yes, exactly. And there was one more factor, perhaps the most important one, the Karluk Turks.
You mentioned them earlier. Who were they exactly?
The Karluk Turks were a confederation of Turkish tribes from the Central Asian steppes. They were phenomenal horsemen, deadly with bows, and they had been allied with the Tang Dynasty for years. They made up a significant portion of Gao Xianji's army at Talas, maybe a third of his total forces.
I feel like there's a but coming.
Oh, there definitely is. But first, let's talk about the battle itself. The battle began on a hot July day in 751 CE. The two armies faced each other across the Talas River. For the first few days, it was brutal but indecisive. Waves of cavalry charges, crossbow bolts flying overhead, siege weapons hurling stones, men dying in the summer heat. Neither side could gain a decisive advantage.
That must have been terrifying.
Absolutely. Ancient battles weren't like modern warfare. You could see your enemy's face. You could smell the blood, hear the screams. And this went on for days. Charge, retreat, regroup, charge again. The soldiers were exhausted. The commanders were desperate for an advantage.
And then the Karluk Turks made their move?
Yes. On the fifth day of the battle, right in the middle of a crucial engagement, the Karluk Turks did something that changed everything. The Tang forces were in the middle of a coordinated attack, infantry advancing, cavalry on the flanks, the battle hanging in the balance. And then, without warning, the Karluk Turks turned. They didn't just withdraw from the battle, they attacked their own allies. They fell on the Tang forces from behind.
They switched sides? In the middle of the battle?
In the middle of the battle. Imagine being a Tang soldier fighting for your life, and suddenly the cavalry you thought were protecting your flank are charging at you instead. The Tang lines collapsed. It was catastrophic.
But why? Why would they do that?
We don't know for certain, but historians have theories. The Karluk Turks were pragmatists. They'd been watching the battle for 4 days, and they'd seen the Abbasid forces holding strong. Maybe they decided the Abbasids were going to win, and they wanted to be on the winning side. Maybe the Abbasids had been negotiating with them in secret. Maybe they had grievances with the Tang Dynasty we don't know about.
Or maybe they just saw an opportunity and took it.
Exactly. Whatever their reasons, the effect was immediate and devastating. The Tang army shattered. Soldiers fled in all directions. Some tried to retreat in organized units, but most just ran. The Abbasid cavalry pursued them mercilessly. The battle lasted 5 days. The rout, it was over in hours.
And General Li Siye, what happened to him?
Li Siye held the rear guard. While thousands fled, while panic spread through the Tang ranks, he and his Black Armoured Cavalry held the line. They bought time for the survivors to escape. They fought until they were overwhelmed.
Did he survive?
He did. Barely. He made it back to Tang territory, but only because his men sacrificed themselves to save him. The general who always led from the front had to be dragged away from the battlefield by his own soldiers.
How bad was the defeat? How many died?
The Tang forces started with about 20,000 soldiers, maybe a third of them Karluk Turks. When the Karluks turned, that left about 14,000 Tang soldiers facing the Abbasid army, plus the Karluks combined. By the end of the battle, the Tang forces were destroyed. Only about 2,000 Tang soldiers made it back to Chinese territory. That's a 70% casualty rate.
70%? That's horrific.
It was one of the worst military disasters in Tang history. But the physical casualties were only part of the story. The real impact, that came from what happened to the survivors. So, the battle is over. The Tang forces are destroyed. General Li Siye and a handful of survivors limp back to Tang territory. What happens next?
The Tang Dynasty tries to send another army?
No, that's what's so interesting. They didn't. The Battle of Talas was such a catastrophic defeat that the Tang Dynasty pulled back from Central Asia entirely. They abandoned their garrisons in cities like Samarkand and Bukhara. They retreated to the edges of the Tarim Basin and stayed there.
Wait, so one battle ended decades of Tang expansion?
One battle. The psychological impact was enormous. The Tang Emperor had lost faith in Western expansion. The costs were too high, the risks too great. Central Asia was lost.
And what about the other side? What did the Abbasids do with their victory?
The Abbasids consolidated control over Central Asia. They secured the Silk Road trade routes. They established their influence over the oasis cities. But more importantly, much more importantly, they did something with their prisoners that changed world history.
The Chinese prisoners of war. You've been building to this. What happened to them?
After the battle, thousands of Chinese soldiers were taken prisoner. Many of them were taken to Baghdad and Samarkand, the great cities of the Abbasid Caliphate. Now, among these prisoners were craftsmen, artisans, engineers, and some of them knew how to make paper.
The secret of papermaking, the thing you mentioned at the beginning.
Exactly. The Chinese had been making paper for centuries, since the Han Dynasty. But they'd kept the process secret. It was a closely guarded technology, one of the foundations of Chinese administrative power and cultural prestige. And now, suddenly, that secret was in Abbasid hands.
So, what did the Abbasids do? Did they force the prisoners to teach them?
We don't know exactly how it happened. Some historians think the prisoners were forced to reveal the secrets. Others think they traded the knowledge for better treatment. Either way, by the 750s, paper mills were being established in Samarkand, which was being built in Samarkand. The technology began to spread throughout the Islamic world.
And that's huge, right? Because before paper, what were they using?
In the Islamic world, they'd been using parchment made from animal skins and papyrus imported from Egypt. Both were expensive and labor-intensive. Paper was revolutionary. It was cheaper, easier to make, and you could produce it in massive quantities. Suddenly, books became affordable. Knowledge became accessible. And here's where it gets really interesting. The Islamic world was already experiencing a cultural renaissance. Baghdad was becoming one of the greatest centers of learning in human history. The House of Wisdom was gathering manuscripts from Greek, Persian, Indian, Chinese sources. Scholars were translating, studying, expanding on ancient knowledge.
And paper made all of that possible on a massive scale.
Exactly. Arabic calligraphy became an art form. Libraries exploded in size. Copies of the Quran could be produced more easily. Hadith collections, scientific treatises, mathematical texts, philosophical works, all could be copied and distributed like never before.
So papermaking technology enabled the Islamic Golden Age?
It was one of the key factors. Think about scholars like Al-Khwarizmi, Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd. They were writing and developing ideas that would shape mathematics, medicine, astronomy, philosophy. And their works could be copied and shared across the Islamic world, from Baghdad to Moorish Spain, because of paper.
And eventually, that technology reached Europe.
Yes, but it took centuries. Paper spread gradually from Central Asia to the Middle East, then to North Africa and Spain. Islamic scholars in Cordoba and other Spanish cities had enormous libraries, filled with paper books. European scholars who visited these libraries saw what paper could do. They wanted it.
How long did it take?
Papermaking didn't reach Europe in a significant way until the 1200s and 1300s. The first European paper mills appeared in Italy, then Germany, then France. But once it arrived, it transformed European culture just as it had transformed the Islamic world. By the time Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press in 1450, Europe had a well-established paper industry. Without paper, the printing press would have been useless. You can't mass-produce books on parchment. It's too expensive. But with paper, suddenly you could print thousands of copies of the Bible, scientific treatises, political pamphlets. Knowledge exploded.
So the Battle of Talas led to the printing press?
Not directly, but it set events in motion. The transfer of papermaking technology from China to the Islamic world enabled the Islamic Golden Age, which preserved and expanded on classical knowledge. That knowledge eventually reached Europe. European scholars learned from Islamic texts. The Renaissance built on Islamic foundations, and the printing press, combined with cheap paper, accelerated everything.
So one battle in Central Asia in 751 eventually helped spark the Protestant Reformation, the Scientific Revolution, the Enlightenment.
The Age of Exploration, European colonialism, the Industrial Revolution. I'm not saying the Battle of Talas caused all of that directly, but it was a crucial link in a chain of events that changed how human beings recorded, shared, and built upon knowledge.
It's incredible how one moment can ripple through history like that.
That's one of the great lessons of history, isn't it? The things that seem most important at the time, the territory, the military victory, often matter less than the unintended consequences. The Abbasid Caliphate won a battle. They didn't realize they were gaining access to a technology that would reshape their entire civilization.
And the Tang Dynasty lost a battle, but they didn't realize they were losing a monopoly on paper making that would eventually spread to the entire world.
Exactly. Neither side understood what was really at stake.
You mentioned that the Tang Dynasty abandoned Central Asia after Talas. What happened to them?
The Tang Dynasty continued for another century and a half, but it never recovered its former glory. Just a few years after Talas, in 755, the An Lushan Rebellion broke out. It was one of the bloodiest civil wars in human history. The Tang Dynasty survived, but it was permanently weakened. They never again controlled Central Asia.
So Talas was the beginning of the end for Tang expansion?
It was the high water mark. After Talas, the Tang Dynasty turned inward, focused on internal stability rather than external conquest. The Abbasid Caliphate, meanwhile, entered its Golden Age. For the next few centuries, Baghdad was arguably the most important city in the world, a center of learning, culture, trade. The Islamic world stretched from Spain and North Africa through the Middle East to Central Asia, and paper was one of the tools that held it all together.
Because you could copy and distribute texts across that entire network of cities. Damascus, Cairo, Cordoba, Baghdad, they could all share knowledge.
Exactly. Libraries, madrasas, religious schools, centers of learning sprung up across the Islamic world, and they were connected by a network of scholars, all writing and reading on paper. It was the world's first true information network.
What about General Li Siye? What happened to him after the battle?
Li Siye made it back to Tang territory, as I mentioned. He was one of the few senior officers to survive. The emperor recognized his courage and continued to give him commands, but he was never the same. He'd seen his army destroyed, his men slaughtered, his empire's ambitions crushed. A few years later, during the An Lushan Rebellion, Li Siye fought again. And this time, he died in battle, defending the Tang Dynasty to the very end.
He held the line twice.
He did, and that's why we need to remember him. Not just as a general, not just as a warrior, but as someone who understood what duty meant, what sacrifice meant. When everything was falling apart, he stood firm. That kind of courage deserves to be remembered.
Let's talk about paper itself. It's such a common thing now that we don't even think about it, but it really did change everything, didn't it?
It's almost impossible to overstate how important paper was to human development. Before paper, knowledge was scarce. After paper, knowledge could spread. Think about what paper enabled. Religious texts could be copied and distributed. The Quran, the Bible, Buddhist sutras. Scientific knowledge could be shared. Observations, experiments, mathematical proofs. Ideas could spread across continents.
And it wasn't just about spreading existing knowledge. It was about building on it. Scientists and scholars could read what others had discovered, then push further.
Exactly. That's the foundation of human progress. Each generation building on the discoveries of the last. Paper made that possible in a way that had never been possible before. European monasteries in the 1300s and 1400s were full of paper manuscripts. Islamic libraries in the 1000s and 1100s had thousands of paper books. Chinese archives had been using paper for centuries before that. It was the technology that made human knowledge cumulative.
It's kind of like the internet today, isn't it? A technology that lets people share and build on knowledge across huge distances.
That's a brilliant parallel, Ethan. Yes, exactly. Paper was the first information revolution. The printing press was the second. The internet is the third. And they all work on the same principle, making it easier for people to share what they know and learn from each other.
And just like with paper, we probably don't fully understand yet how the internet is going to change things. We're living through a revolution, and we can't see all the consequences.
Exactly. The people who captured those Chinese papermakers at Talas in 751 had no idea they were enabling the Renaissance. We have no idea what our technologies today will enable in 500 or 1,000 years.
I keep thinking about the Karluk Turks. Their decision to switch sides changed everything, but we don't really know why they did it, do we?
We don't, and that's one of the frustrations of history. Sometimes the most important decisions are made by people whose motives we can't fully understand. Were the Karluks being pragmatic? Were they being opportunistic? Had they been mistreated by the Tang? We may never know.
Maybe that's the lesson, though. Individual choices made for reasons that might seem small or personal or pragmatic can have enormous consequences. The Karluk leaders made a decision on a battlefield in 751, and it changed the course of empires.
And that brings us to another crucial point. The Islamic world didn't just copy what the Chinese knew about paper. They improved it, refined it, found new uses for it. Islamic scholars developed ideas about empiricism and observation that influenced later European science. They preserved Greek and Roman texts that Europe had lost. They developed algebra, advanced astronomy, sophisticated medicine.
So it wasn't just about preserving knowledge, it was about advancing it.
Exactly. And paper was the tool that made that advancement possible. Scholars could write down their observations, their experiments, their calculations. Other scholars could read those writings, check the work, build on it. It was early forms of peer review, of scientific collaboration. The foundations for what we call the scientific method today were being laid in Islamic libraries and madrasas, written on paper that had come from Chinese prisoners at Talas.
So what we're really talking about is how connected everything is. A battle in Central Asia leads to paper-making spreading to the Islamic world. That enables a cultural golden age. That knowledge spreads to Europe. That helps spark the Renaissance. And all of that eventually leads to the modern world.
That's exactly right. History isn't a series of isolated events, it's all connected. The Battle of Talas matters because of what came after it. The Islamic Golden Age matters because of what came before it and what came after it. The Renaissance matters because it built on Islamic and classical foundations. It's all one continuous story.
7 continents, one story.
Precisely, Ethan, precisely. But we also have to remember the human cost. Thousands of soldiers died at Talas. Thousands more were taken prisoner, never to see their homes again. Those Chinese craftsmen who were forced to reveal the secret of papermaking, we don't even know their names. They were just ordinary people caught up in events larger than themselves.
And yet their knowledge, their skills changed the world.
That's one of the history's great ironies. The powerful people, the generals and emperors and caliphs, they thought they were making history through their battles and their conquests. But sometimes it's the ordinary people, the craftsmen and scholars and merchants, who have the biggest impact. Not through violence, but through knowledge and skill and innovation.
So why does this battle, this technology transfer still matter today? What should we take away from this?
Several things. First, technology eventually spreads no matter how hard you try to protect it. The Chinese tried to keep papermaking secret for centuries, but one battle broke that monopoly. Today, we see the same dynamic with modern technologies. You can delay the spread, but you can't stop it forever.
Second, small powers and unexpected events can change the course of history. The Karluk Turks were a minor player compared to the Tang Dynasty and the Abbasid Caliphate, but their decision changed everything.
And third, the consequences of our actions can be completely different from what we intended. The generals at Talas were fighting over territory and trade routes. They had no idea they were facilitating one of the most important technology transfers in history.
Those are all crucial lessons, but here's what strikes me most. The Battle of Talas shows us that knowledge is more powerful than military force. The Tang Dynasty won dozens of battles, built a massive empire, conquered vast territories. But one transfer of papermaking technology had a bigger impact on world history than all those military victories combined. Ideas, knowledge, technology. These are the things that truly change the world.
And it was a cross-cultural exchange, wasn't it? Chinese technology in Islamic hands, spreading to Europe, building on Greek and Roman and Persian foundations. It wasn't one civilization working in isolation. It was ideas flowing between civilizations.
That's such an important point, Celine. The story of human progress isn't about one culture or one civilization being superior. It's about exchange, about learning from each other, about building on what others have discovered. The Islamic Golden Age built on Chinese, Greek, Persian, and Indian knowledge. The European Renaissance built on Islamic achievements. The modern world builds on all of that.
And the Battle of Talas was one of the moments that made that exchange possible.
Exactly. A battle that seemed to be about conquest and territory was actually about opening channels of communication and exchange.
It's like when companies try to protect their patents today, or when countries try to control technology exports.
Perfect parallel. The Chinese tried to keep papermaking secret the same way modern countries try to control sensitive technologies, nuclear weapons, advanced semiconductors, encryption methods.
And just like with paper, eventually those technologies spread anyway. You can delay it, but you can't stop it forever.
That's one of the great lessons of history. Technology and knowledge want to spread. Trying to contain them is like trying to hold back water with your hands.
You know what this reminds me of? The Sengoku period in Japan during the 1500s. You had all these daimyo, these regional lords, constantly switching alliances, betraying each other, trying to figure out who would come out on top.
Great parallel. Tell us more.
Like, the Karluk Turks switching sides isn't unusual when you look at it from a Japanese perspective. During the Sengoku period, it was pretty normal for smaller daimyo to switch allegiances based on who was winning. It wasn't seen as dishonorable, it was seen as smart politics.
So different cultures have different views on loyalty and betrayal?
Exactly. In some contexts, flexibility is valued more than rigid loyalty, especially when you're a smaller power caught between bigger ones.
That's a really sophisticated observation, Ethan. The concept of loyalty varies enormously across cultures and time periods. What seems like betrayal from one perspective might seem like pragmatic survival from another.
Here's something I found fascinating in my library research. Do you know how long it took for paper-making technology to reach Europe after it left China?
A couple hundred years?
Try 600 years, from the Battle of Talas in 751 to the first European paper mill in around 1350. 6 centuries.
And here's another surprising fact. That Tang Dynasty general, Gao Xianji, the one who started all of this by attacking Tashkent, he survived the battle and continued serving the Tang Dynasty. A few years later, he was involved in trying to suppress a major rebellion called the An Lushan Rebellion.
Wait, so he didn't get punished for losing such a huge battle?
The Tang Dynasty was pragmatic. Gao Xianji was an experienced commander, and they needed every skilled general they could get. Eventually, he was executed, but for political reasons during the rebellion, not for losing at Talas.
That says something about how complex history is. The person who triggered this world-changing event wasn't some villain or hero, just a general making calculated decisions that happened to have enormous consequences.
So what can we learn from the Battle of Talas? Several things, I think.
Technology eventually spreads no matter how hard you try to protect it.
Small powers can change the course of history by choosing sides at the right moment.
Yes to both. But here's what strikes me most, the unintended consequences. The Tang Dynasty and the Abbasid Caliphate were fighting over territory and trade routes. Neither of them imagined that the most important outcome would be the spread of paper-making technology.
History is full of those moments, isn't it? The things we think matter at the time aren't always what actually matters in the long run.
Exactly. The generals at Talas thought they were fighting over Central Asian trade. They had no idea they were facilitating a technological revolution that would enable the Islamic Golden Age and eventually the European Renaissance.
One battle, so many consequences.
So, what did we learn today?
We learned about a battle that most people have never heard of, fought on a river in Central Asia in the year 751 CE.
We learned how the Karluk Turks switching sides changed the balance of power in Central Asia forever.
We learned how Chinese prisoners of war carried the secret of papermaking to the Islamic world, triggering a revolution in how knowledge was recorded and shared.
We learned how that paper technology enabled the Islamic Golden Age and eventually spread to Europe, helping to enable the Renaissance.
And we learned about different perspectives on loyalty and betrayal, and how smaller powers navigate between larger empires.
But most importantly, we learned about General Li Siye. While others fled, he held the rear guard. While chaos reigned, he bought time for survivors to escape. While the Tang Dynasty faced catastrophic defeat, he ensured they would at least understand what happened and why.
Without his courage, the Tang Dynasty might have sent another army into Central Asia, might have suffered even greater losses.
Without him, we might not even know the true story of what happened at Talas.
History remembers the great commanders. History remembers the famous battles. History remembers the empires and their conquests. But we need to remember the people who held the line when everything was falling apart. We need to remember the courage of those who sacrificed so that others could survive.
Remember Li Siye?
Remember the name.
Remember General Li Siye. Remember the name. Every time I think about this battle, about this moment in history, I'm struck by how interconnected everything is. One general's brutal decision in Tashkent triggers a war. One confederation's choice on a battlefield changes the course of empires. One transfer of prisoners changes how the entire world records and shares knowledge.
And one general's courage ensures that the truth survives, that lessons are learned, that sacrifice has meaning.
That's what history is, isn't it? All these individual choices, all these moments, all connected together into the story of humanity.
That's beautifully said, Ethan.
Hey, what did you think about the Karluk decision? Would you have stayed loyal or switched sides? We genuinely love to hear your thoughts in the comments.
And if you don't want to miss episodes like this, make sure to follow us or subscribe.
You can also sign up for our email newsletter to stay updated on all our journeys through history.
We're already preparing something fascinating for next time.
It might be from Europe or Africa, or somewhere completely different. We haven't decided yet.
All I can say is that it involves another moment that changed the world in ways nobody expected.
That's the beauty of 7 continents, 1 story. You never know where history will take us next.
Until our next journey through time, keep history alive.